Hi guys, so I wanted to do a recap on some of the lectures from Skill in Sport. So we're going to go back and have a look at skill classification, okay, what it is, what it entails, because ultimately it forms the first part of your assessment. Okay, so we'll go through the lecture as I went through right at the start of the module. So okay, so in terms of what an ability and what a skill is then. Okay, so Honeyborn 2006. Abilities are largely determined genetically. Okay, so naturally occurring, they're inherited from parents. Okay, and they are fairly enduring characteristics. All right, so that meaning that they would stay fairly consistent. Now, a skill, on the other hand, all right, so the difference between them, a skill, is learned through practice. Okay, so by various forms of practice. All right, and obviously we talk about these later in the module, from massed practice, varied practice, and distributed practice. These can be learnt, all right, and because they can be learnt, they can be refined, and therefore we can improve performance. Okay, now the abilities are sort of the underlying attributes that bring out the skill. All right, so our inherent abilities almost determine how well we can perform the skill. Okay, that in sort of combination with learning the appropriate technique and knowledge of when to actually perform the skill, effectively means to a more successful performance outcome. All right, and perhaps some examples of varying abilities could be things like strength, balance, flexibility, generally that link to sort of the health components of fitness, as it were. Okay, but what those abilities do is they allow us to inherently bring out the skills, all right, and almost determine how well we can produce the skills, and then through practice, okay, we can learn the technique, improve efficiency, and obviously develop our knowledge of when actually we can perform the skill. So in terms of different types of skill then, all right, so cognitive, so these are the intellectual or the mental skills, all right, and in particular quite heavily involved with decision making, because they are very important for perception. Okay, so the perception of what is actually happening in the situation, but this sort of links to what we cover later on in the module, particularly around decision making, information processing. All right, particularly to do with the perceptual mechanism. Okay, so you've got cognitive skills, which are sort of the intellectual skills. Excuse me. You've got perceptual skills. All right, so these involve interpretation of the information received, so that a motor plan can be formed. So this should start to sound familiar to you. Okay, particularly in the central mechanism, like I said. All right, you've got your translatory and your perceptual mechanisms in the information processing model proposed by Sharp and Whiting. All right, we can start to see where this sort of information fits in, so that a motor plan can be formed. So based on the information, okay, we access memory, okay, and it's that memory then that gives us, okay, so based on what we've seen before, this is the right motor plan to implement. Okay, so perception is affected by previous experience, again, so kind of that link to memory and that attentional control as well. Okay, and then finally, we've obviously got the motor skills, which is the physical limb movement. So again, if we perhaps link that to our information processing model, that links to the physical limb movements, all right, the effector mechanism, the actual doing, okay, of the motor program that has been sent to those effector organs, the effector organs being the muscles. Excuse me. So in terms of, before we learn any sort of advanced skill, okay, inherently there are fundamental movement skills that we learn. Alright, now these fundamental movement skills, those of you that are involved in coaching young ages or involved in schools or teaching, okay, you will know that students learn basic skills first, okay, and it's the basic movement skills that they learn most of the time through play. Okay, so particularly in things like the foundation phase in primary school, alright, these basic movement skills are learnt through play. Okay, and if they're learnt thoroughly, they can be adapted and refined to all sports. So the fundamental movement skills underpin, alright, the more advanced skills that we have. And effectively the skills that we see in sport are just advanced versions of fundamental movement skills. Alright. Now in terms of where this looks, alright, so in terms of figure 1 here, obviously you can see in terms of the hierarchy, instant reflexes, rudimentary movement skills, so again very much babies, toddlers, alright, things like walking, basic hand-eye coordination, picking up toys, picking up all different rudimentary skills at a young age. Then we've got the fundamental movement skills, things like hop, jump, skip, run, okay, that again children normally pick up in primary school. Excuse me. And then once we sort of got these fundamental movement skills, then they become more sport specific, so through particular training, alright, which is generally why sort of up to year 6 a lot of primary school PE is more about body management, because it's that body management that underpins the more sport specific, which when you get to sort of secondary school or high school, your PE lessons start to look a little bit different and they go very much sport specific. Okay, so this figure just kind of highlights in terms of the hierarchy what skills we learn first and then how they build up to sport specific skills. Okay, so primary thing from this part is that fundamental movement skills underpin sport specific skills, and these fundamental movement skills are generally learned at a young age through primary education, and most of the time through play, so various forms of play. Alright, those motor skills are learned, which is generally why it's advocated that that students engage with as many different sports and sporting experiences as possible when they're young. Alright, so they learn as many of these different fundamental movement skills as possible. Alright, this means that when they get to sport specific training, alright, they have a better underpinning of those fundamentals. Okay, and in terms of different agencies, already talked about that how coaching can have a big impact on that. Excuse me, and teaching as well. Okay, but again, things like trial and error, experience, reinforcement. Again, we should start to be familiar with some of the learning theories. Alright, so that link into operant conditioning. Alright, so Skinner's rats. Okay, so that should ring a bell. We'll talk about that later on. But it's that sort of reinforcement from significant others, in combination with trial and error, leads to that improvement in fundamental movement skills. Okay, so movement skills in themselves, alright, so a little bit of a definition here from Wolf, is an action or task that has a goal, alright, that requires voluntary body or limb movements to achieve that goal. Okay, so the goal of the movement skills are effectively proficiency and efficiency, so performing the skill well and performing it efficiently, ultimately to achieve a specific outcome. So if it is a pass, a tackle, alright, the aim of or the goal of that is to achieve something within the game, but also achieve it effectively and efficiently. Now, posed question there, obviously did that in the lectures. Does the ability to execute the movement skill differ between performers? How and why? And ultimately, yes, they would. And largely that's because of this. Okay, so we link back. So those that have had more experience, alright, and more opportunity to develop fundamental movement skills, okay, then they're going to have a lower ability to execute, okay, the movement skills. Now, by having as many different experiences as possible to develop these here in particular, okay, what that does is that makes the individual have a better or higher ability to execute movement skills, because they have a larger sort of memory, a larger experience bank in order to draw upon. Okay, so just sort of consider that, particularly towards the latter part of your assessment. So in terms of what a skill is then, alright, so looking at kind of getting a little bit more specific now, so I would expect to see some of these definitions in your introduction to your assessment. So when we're talking about a skill and classifying a skill, okay, we can do this and we sort of attribute specific criteria to it. Okay, so We can classify a skill by how precise the movement is, alright, so sort of how refined the motor control that's required for the movement are, whether the movement has a definite beginning or end, alright, that plays a big part, and whether the environment affects the skill of the performer. Okay, and these can be done on sort of various continuums. So we're going to talk through these continuums, and this forms the first part of your assessment. Okay, so for your assessment, you are required to fully classify a skill. Now, obviously, in the lecture, you were asked to do that for your chosen skill. Okay, so if you've done that, again, this becomes a lot easier for you. If you haven't, you've got a little bit of work to do, because this forms part 1 of your assessment. Okay, and I'll link it to that feedback in the second video. Okay, so we'll hold it there for this video, and then I'll start another one, go through each of the continuums, because it'll take a little bit of time, and then I'll link it to the assessment for you.